You learn a lot about your place in the world at a wedding. Usually, it's a good thing. At my sister Chloe's wedding, it was an education. The venue was absurdly expensive, something out of a magazine. I was standing near the back, holding a glass of champagne that had long gone flat. I watched my mother fuss over Chloe's dress, her face a perfect mask of maternal pride. That's when I heard it. My uncle, leaning toward my father, gesturing vaguely in my direction. The words carried. "What does Rae even do?" My mother, who hears everything, laughed a little too loudly. "Oh, you know Rae," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Head in the clouds. Nothing impressive. Nothing impressive." I looked down at my glass. The bubbles were all gone. Later, the groom, Liam, stepped up to the microphone. He was charming, handsome, perfect for Chloe's aesthetic. He thanked the parents, praised the bridesmaids, and then he started talking about my sister. It was a good speech. And then he paused. His eyes scanned the room, past the smiling faces, past my parents, and they landed directly on me. The easygoing smile on his face was gone. His posture shifted. The whole room felt it. The air just changed. "But there's one more person I have to thank," he said. His voice was different now. Clear, serious. Someone without whom I literally wouldn't be standing here today. He kept his eyes locked on me. "Most of you know her as Chloe's quiet sister, but I know her as Commander Rae." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. I saw my father exchange a baffled look with my mother. And that's when everything went silent. That moment, when the whole room is staring at you, and you know a secret they don't. Let me ask you, what would your very first thought have been right then? What would you have done? Liam raised his glass, not to the room, but to me. "Commander Rae," he said, his voice ringing out. "I owe you my life." And then, the silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet, and that's when I saw it. The perfect radiant smile on my sister's face didn't just vanish. It shattered. It was replaced by a look of pure, ice-cold fear. Suddenly, a memory, no, not a memory, a piece of evidence, snapped into place. The frantic, encrypted phone call from Liam 3 months before. He was panicked, talking about a business deal, about partners who were more than just angry. I didn't give him advice. I gave him a set of non-negotiable instructions. Transfer this exact amount from this account. Delete these specific apps from your phone. Go to this address and wait for my signal. He didn't understand why. He just trusted me. And standing there in that silent room, seeing the terror on my sister's face as my mother and father stared in blank confusion, it all connected. A cold, clarifying shock washed over me. Years of being the unimpressive one, the quiet one, the responsible one, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point. So he knows, and they have no idea. The wedding reception ended at midnight. I was home by 12:30. At 2 a.m., I was sitting in the dark of my own apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the noise from a few hours earlier. The adrenaline from Liam's toast had faded, and what was left was a cold, quiet hum. A question that needed an answer. I couldn't sleep. Not because of the drama, but because of the data. The look on my sister's face wasn't just shock. It was the face of someone whose carefully constructed world had just been hit by a wrecking ball. It was a look of pure, operational panic. For months, I'd been ignoring it. A small, persistent alert from my credit monitoring service. A little flag in my inbox that I'd archive without a second thought. I told myself I was too busy, but that wasn't the truth. The truth is, sometimes it's just easier not to look at the things that feel wrong. Have you ever had that feeling? That nagging sense that something is off with your finances? A loose thread you're afraid to pull because you don't know what might unravel? What was the one thing that finally made you look? For me, it was the memory of my sister's face. That was the thing. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt harsh in the darkness. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The part of my brain that handles emotion was offline. The part that handles threats was fully engaged. I told myself what I'd say to a subordinate before a mission briefing. It's okay, Rae. Treat it like a case. Start with the evidence. I logged into the credit monitoring service. And there it was. The inquiry, not from a normal bank. It was from a high-risk, subprime lender. The kind that gives money to people who have no other options. The purpose of the inquiry was listed as a business loan. And then I saw the address on the application. It wasn't my address. It was the address for a chic little boutique I'd only seen in pictures on my father's social media feed. The address for Chloe, well, my sister's great business venture. And that's when another piece of evidence clicked into place. A phone call from 6 months ago. My mother. Her voice was so casual, so breezy. She'd said she was setting up a new family life insurance policy, and she just needed to confirm a few details. My social security number, my date of birth. I was on my way to a briefing. I was distracted. I gave them to her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. Her casual tone now felt rehearsed. My heart rate didn't spike. It settled. It became a slow, heavy drumbeat. This was no longer an anomaly. It was a crime scene. And I was standing at the digital front door. I navigated to the lender's website. It was slick, full of promises of entrepreneurial freedom. I clicked the login button, then forgot password. I entered my own email address. Nothing. I tried Chloe's. Nothing. Then I tried a permutation I knew my mother loved, my first name, and Chloe's birthday. The screen refreshed. Password reset instructions have been sent. I opened another tab. I logged into my mother's email account. She'd given me the password years ago, asked me to help her sort her bills, to create folders, to bring order to her digital chaos. She said she was hopeless with technology. I see now that was just another part of the cover story. The email was right there at the top of her inbox. Subject, reset your password. I clicked the link. There was a low hum in the back of my mind. A feeling of betrayal, I suppose. But it was distant. My primary state was one of intense, chilling focus. This wasn't personal. This was an infiltration. I was an investigator. And they had left the door unlocked and the security system off. This is where it gets technical, and you have to be precise. For anyone out there who's ever had to become a detective in their own life, what's the one digital tool you couldn't have lived without? For me, it was their own carelessness. It was their arrogance. Then didn't even bother to be clever about it. The new password was set. I logged in, and there it was. Not a small loan. A business loan for $150,000. Taken out in my name. The disbursement schedule was there. The repayment schedule was there. And the account was already flagged as delinquent. My pristine credit score, the one I'd built meticulously since I was 18, was being systematically destroyed. The money had been disbursed to a bank account number I had never seen before in my life. And I thought of my father, beaming in a photo online, posting about how proud he was that Chloe had built her business from the ground up, that she had secured the rest all on her own. The lie wasn't just deep. It was wide. It was a family project. I didn't panic. Panicking gets you killed. I opened a new application on my computer, a secure encrypted spreadsheet I use for work. I began to build the case file. Column A, lender name. Column B, loan amount. Column C, date of application. I ran a trace on the IP address logged on the application. It came back to my parents' home network. I logged that too. Then, I focused on the fraudulent bank account number. I found the bank, another online-only entity that promised easy access with minimal oversight. I started the same process. Forgot password. This time, it asked for the phone number associated with the account. I didn't use my number. I used Chloe's. I knew she was on a flight to her honeymoon. I knew her phone would be off. Two-factor authentication. A code was sent to her number. And a second later, a notification pinged on the burner phone sitting on my desk. A phone I'd had to set up months ago, cloning her number after that first frantic call from Liam. I'd had to monitor her communications to keep him safe. I never thought I'd be using it to investigate her. I typed in the code. I was in. The shock I'd been suppressing finally started to curdle into something else. A cold, methodical rage. I was looking at a transaction history that was a monument to their lies. What's the most shocking thing you've ever found on a bank statement? I promise you, this was worse. There were payments to high-end vendors for Chloe, payments for Chloe's apartment, down payments to the wedding venue, the caterer, the florist, a life of luxury, all of it purchased with a debt they had assigned to me. And then I saw the pattern. A recurring monthly payment, a consulting fee of $2,000, sent every month like clockwork to a second account. An account in my mother's name? It all came back to something Chloe had said to me once, scoffing when I offered her a legitimate loan from my savings. She was wearing a new designer watch, complaining about how hard it was to get capital. She'd laughed and said she had it handled. It was clear now what she meant. You don't just steal a name, you build a whole infrastructure. My eyes were moving fast, scanning the data, my training kicking in. I wasn't just looking at transactions anymore, I was looking for a specific pattern. I was looking for the dates from the week Liam had called me in a panic. And then I found it. A single large incoming wire transfer, $50,000. It was from a holding company I recognized from my professional work. A known shell corporation for a criminal enterprise in Eastern Europe. The money came in, and then a series of frantic payments went out, to vendors for a product shipment Chloe was supposed to have delivered weeks before. A wave of physical nausea hit me. I finally understood. My sister hadn't just built a fake company. She had built a fraudulent one. She was taking money from dangerous people for goods she couldn't deliver. Liam, as the chief operating officer, was the one whose name was on the shipping manifests. He was the one they would have come for. He was going to be the fall guy. My intervention for him. It wasn't just about saving his reputation or his money. I remembered it now as a series of tactical moves. Anonymously delivering an evidence packet to a rival syndicate, pointing their wrath in a different direction. Simultaneously executing a series of automated payments from one of my own offshore accounts to the vendors, making it look like a system glitch had been resolved. I had neutralized the threat. I had saved his life. I had to step in and fix a problem they created without getting any credit. We've all been there, I'm sure. But this was different. This wasn't fixing a mistake. This was disarming a bomb. The full picture was right there, on my screen. A conspiracy, elegant in its simplicity and breathtaking in its cruelty. My stolen identity, my good name, was the weapon they used to fund the company. The fraudulent company was the trap they used to endanger the man my sister claimed to love. And my parents were the willing architects of the entire operation. Then they built a cage for him and used my name for the bars. The sun started to come up. I hadn't slept. The screen of my laptop glowed with the evidence, the loan agreements, the transaction histories, the entire digital blueprint of my family's betrayal. The emotional storm, the shock, the nausea, the rage, had passed. What was left was something quiet and far more dangerous. It was clarity. I closed the spreadsheet. All that data, all that proof. It was just the raw intelligence. It wasn't a plan. I opened a new secure document. A fresh page. At the top, in clean block letters, I typed a title, Project Nightingale. Then I began to list the personnel involved. I didn't write their names. I assigned them roles. My sister, Chloe, became primary beneficiary. My mother became chief architect, emotional division. And my father, my quiet, conflict-avoidant father, he was listed as primary funder, negligent. They weren't my family anymore. They were hostile actors in a conspiracy perpetrated against me. And every operation needs a clear objective. Mine wasn't revenge. Revenge is messy. It's emotional. I defined my mission with 3 cold, achievable goals. 1. Total financial restitution. Every cent they stole. Every point of damage to my credit repaired. 2. Legal confession of fraud. I wanted their guilt documented and signed. 3. The complete and permanent dismantling of the Chloe entity and any other fraudulent structures they'd built using my name. I started a checklist. I needed hard copies. I needed to find the original loan documents, the ones with the forged signatures. I needed recorded conversations. I needed sworn affidavits. And right then, I made a critical decision. The burner phone, the access to my mother's email, those were tools I had used to uncover the crime. They were my entry point. But they would not be part of the final evidence packet. My case had to be pristine, untouchable. I would use the knowledge I'd gained to legally acquire irrefutable proof. No shortcuts, no vulnerabilities. And as I typed, a voice from my past came back to me, clear as day. It was my instructor from a military training exercise years ago. We were building a case against a corrupt superior officer. He stood over my shoulder and said the words that were now my guiding principle. Emotion makes you a witness, he'd said. Evidence makes you a threat. Build the evidence. And so I began to build. At this point, the path forward splits into two possibilities, doesn't it? If you were in my shoes faced with this level of betrayal, would you go for quiet justice, just getting the money back and cutting them off? Or would you aim for public justice, exposing them completely no matter the consequences? Tell me your reasoning in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you would have done. For me, there was no choice. Their conspiracy wasn't just about money. They put a man's life in danger. They did it casually. The system had to be torn down to the studs. I looked at the words on my screen, the designations, the objectives, and I realized what I was becoming. This isn't a family problem. This is a criminal conspiracy, and I am going to be the prosecution. My work continued for another hour, creating a detailed flowchart of the money, from my father's accounts, through the fraudulent loans, into the Schlo-Well account, and out to my mother and Chloe's lavish lifestyle. As I cross-referenced the payments from the fraudulent account, I found a new recurring charge. A monthly payment to a high-security storage facility. The unit wasn't in my name, or Chloe's. It was rented in my mother's name, but paid for by the business loan they took out in Enemind name. I pulled the access logs. Chloe had visited it 6 times in the last 2 months. Suddenly, the case wasn't just digital anymore. It had a physical location, a black box. And I knew I had to get inside. Before I did anything else, I needed a legal framework. I needed to know what a real prosecutor would need. I contacted a man I'd served with, a former JAG Corps lawyer who now specialized in financial crimes. He was sharp, discreet, and owed me a favor. I didn't give him my name or my family's. I framed the entire situation as a hypothetical case study for a new security consulting project I was supposedly working on. A sterile third-person narrative about a subject whose identity was compromised by associated actors. He listened patiently. He was intrigued. He started firing back questions, and with each one, my plan became clearer. He walked me through the specific statutes. Identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. He gave me the vocabulary for their crimes. He explained that to make a case stick, I had to prove intent. It wasn't enough to show that they did it, I had to prove they knew what they were doing. The father figure, he said, the negligent funder, he has the easiest defense. He'll just say he was duped, that he didn't understand the paperwork, that he trusted his wife and daughter. The lawyer told me that unless I could prove he willfully ignored clear red flags, he could walk away. And just like that, another piece of evidence, another memory, became a weapon. My father's Sunday morning ritual. For as long as I can remember, he would sit at the kitchen table with a ruler and a red pen, going over his bank statements. Line by line, he would circle a $2 overcharge on a restaurant bill. He would call the bank over a 50-cent fee he didn't recognize. He was meticulous. The idea that this man, my father, would fail to notice 6-figure transactions leaving his accounts for a company he'd invested in, it wasn't just improbable. It was impossible. His greatest defense was a lie, and his own fastidious nature was the proof I needed to destroy it. It's funny how a piece of advice can change everything. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received when you were facing a massive problem? And more importantly, did you take it? The lawyer's counsel wasn't just advice, it was a shopping list. A detailed list of the evidence I needed to collect to dismantle every possible defense they could mount. It's not just about the what. It's about proving the why. Then, as we were about to end the call, he gave me the most valuable piece of intelligence. You know, he said, in these familial fraud cases, a prosecutor's dream is a notarized confession. If you can get them to sign a document admitting what they did, it's over. You avoid a messy public trial, and any judge will grant a summary judgment for full restitution. A notarized confession. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. My objective hadn't been to put them in jail. I just wanted to hold them accountable, to reclaim what was mine. But a legal confession, a signed, witnessed document of their guilt, that was more than accountability. That was power. It was a weapon that would give me complete and total control over the outcome. And in that moment, my endgame solidified. I wasn't just building a case for a prosecutor. I was building the leverage I needed to become the judge, the jury, and the executioner of their conspiracy, all on my own terms. My blueprint for justice was now complete. My blueprint for justice was complete, but it was built on a digital foundation. I needed something physical, something I could hold. The storage unit was the next logical step. The black box. Getting in was a problem of logistics, not force. I couldn't break in. That would compromise the evidence. So I used their own system against them. Years ago, my mother had insisted I get a durable power of attorney drawn up, giving her the ability to handle my affairs if I was deployed. It was supposed to be a safety net. I now see it was just another tool she was adding to her collection. I called the storage facility. I explained that my mother, the unit's renter, had a sudden medical emergency and was unable to come herself. I told them she had tasked me with retrieving some important documents for her. I faxed over the power of attorney. It was legal. It was clean. 20 minutes later, they gave me the access code. The hallway of the facility was long, white, and sterile. The sound of the metal door rolling up was deafeningly loud. The air inside was still and smelled faintly of plastic and cardboard. And then I saw them. Stacked neatly against the back wall were a dozen identical banker's boxes. Each one was labeled in my mother's perfect, looping handwriting. Chloe, childhood, holidays, 1995 to 2005. Family photos. It was a complete archive of our lives. And it made another piece of evidence slide into place. Her obsession with scrapbooking, with organizing photos, with curating our history. Everyone had always called it a sweet, maternal hobby. Standing in that cold concrete box, I saw it for what it was, the symptom of a pathological need to control the narrative. I found the box I was looking for in the back. The label was simple. Rae, admin. My stomach tightened. I lifted the lid, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my entire life, dissected and filed away. My original birth certificate. My social security card. A spare driver's license I thought I'd lost 5 years ago. And beneath that, a folder. Inside were at least 20 blank, pre-signed credit card application forms. My signature, perfectly forged. What's the one physical object from your past you'd be most devastated to find out someone had stolen or misused? For me, it was my own name. My own identity, stolen, stored, and waiting to be deployed. The sheer organization was the most chilling part. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was a calculated long-term project of identity theft, curated by the one person who was supposed to protect me. She wasn't just my mother. She was my archivist. And at the very bottom of the box, I found the cornerstone of their conspiracy. It was a copy of the loan application for the initial seed money for Chloe. Well, it was a loan from my father, yes, but the application wasn't structured that way. It was structured as a business loan from him to the company, and it listed a personal guarantor. A guarantor who would be on the hook if the company defaulted. The signature in the guarantor box was mine. Forged, of course. My father hadn't just given his golden child some startup cash. He had actively, willingly, leveraged my financial security as collateral. He had placed my entire future on the table as his opening bet. The signature was Chloe's forgery, I was sure. But the strategy, that had my mother's fingerprints all over it. The next target on my list was my father. The primary funder. I had to dismantle his shield of plausible deniability. I needed to prove he didn't just fail to see the stop sign, he drove right through it. I scheduled a meeting with his financial advisor, a man he'd used for 30 years. I framed it as seeking advice for my own long-term planning. We sat in his stuffy office and I let him talk for 20 minutes about mutual funds and retirement accounts. Then, I made my move. I casually mentioned how impressed I was with my father's investment in Chloe's company. Well, I asked if that kind of high-risk, high-reward model was something he'd recommend for me. The advisor's entire demeanor shifted. He physically recoiled. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie. He said that was a unique family arrangement. I pushed, gently. I said I wanted to learn from my father's successes. The advisor's professional veneer cracked. He lowered his voice, leaning forward. He told me he had advised my father, in writing, against that specific loan structure. He called it unorthodox and extremely high risk. Why? Because it relied entirely on a third-party guarantor who wasn't even present at the signing. That guarantor was me. Any last, foolish shred of hope that my father was just a pawn, just an ignorant fool who'd been duped, it evaporated in the stale air of that office. He was warned. An expert he trusted told him explicitly not to do it, and he did it anyway. And in that moment, I understood his core philosophy. It came back to me in his own words he'd said to me 1,000 times throughout my childhood whenever Chloe would have a tantrum. The easiest way to keep the peace, Rae, is just to let your mother have her way. It wasn't weak-willed advice. It was his entire operational strategy. He hadn't sacrificed my financial safety out of ignorance. He'd sacrificed it for a quiet life. This is a serious question, and I want to know what you think. Is willful ignorance just as bad as direct participation in a lie? Where is the line? Debate it in the comments. For me, the line was crossed the second he ignored the warning. Then he didn't fail to see the stop sign. He drove right through it. As I was leaving, the advisor, clearly wanting to cover his own liability, said he'd forward me a redacted copy of the email exchange for my educational purposes. The email landed in my inbox before I even reached my car. It was the smoking gun, a time-stamped, documented warning, and my father's one-line reply, "Thank you for your input. We will be proceeding as planned." His shield of plausible deniability was shattered. Next, I focused on the primary beneficiary herself, Chloe. I had to understand the empire she'd built. I had to know if any part of it was real. I went back to the bank statements from the fraudulent account and made a list of every vendor Chloe had ever paid. Then, I started making calls. I posed as a potential investor, performing due diligence on the company. I asked about their order history, their fulfillment rates, their relationship with the company, and a pattern emerged very quickly. It was a brilliant, simple, and utterly fraudulent system. Chloe would use the loan money, my line loan money, to pay a massive deposit to a legitimate, high-end supplier. A $50,000 deposit for artisanal candles, or a $70,000 deposit for organic textiles. The supplier would send her an official invoice and a shipping manifest. This was the paperwork she would then use to prove to other investors, like Liam, that she was running a real, thriving business with huge orders. But then, a week or two later, she would cancel the order. She'd forfeit a small portion of the deposit, maybe 10%. The supplier didn't mind, they'd made free money. And Chloe would get the bulk of the cash returned, which she would then spend on her lifestyle, all while holding the impressive-looking, but ultimately worthless, paperwork. I felt a strange, hollow sort of pity. The sheer amount of work it took, the constant calls, the juggling of lies, the frantic race to keep the house of cards from falling. It was a full-time job. Have you ever known someone who was living a life that was completely fake? How long did it take for the facade to crack? Chloe's was a masterpiece of deception, and the irony was sickening. I thought about how she'd mocked my stable, boring military career. "You just follow orders, Rae," she'd sneered at a family dinner once. "I'm a creator. An entrepreneur." She wasn't an entrepreneur. She was a con artist. She didn't build a business. She built a stage set. The final nail in her coffin came when I got my hands on the original pitch deck she'd used to convince Liam to join her company as chief operating officer. It was a glossy, professional-looking document full of 5-year financial projections based entirely on loans she hadn't yet secured. And then I got to the founder's bio. Her bio. It talked about her leadership experience, her ability to manage complex logistics under pressure, her commendations for operational excellence. It was my life. She had literally copied and pasted accomplishments from my own military service record, changed a few words, and passed them off as her own. She didn't just steal my money and my identity, she stole my story. Finally, I had to understand the architect, the chief gaslighting officer, my mother. I went back to her bank statements, to the recurring $2,000 consulting fees from Chloe. The amount wasn't enough to be pure greed. It was something else. I started cross-referencing the payment dates with my mother's social media posts. The first payment came 3 days after she posted a dozen photos of herself helping Chloe set up a booth at a trade show. The next came a week after she wrote a long post about how she was mentoring Chloe on brand strategy. It wasn't a fee, it was an allowance. It was the price of her active participation and her silence. This was the most painful part of the investigation. This was about ideology. I dug deeper, searching through the family's shared cloud storage, and I found them. Emails between my mother and father, from the very beginning of the scheme. In them, my mother laid out the justification. She never called it stealing. She called it leveling the playing field. She wrote that Chloe didn't have my advantages. The discipline, the career, the pension from the military. She framed my success not as something to be proud of, but as a family resource that Chloe was entitled to. This might be controversial, but I have to ask, can a parent's desire to protect one child ever justify harming another? Where do you draw the line? For my mother, there was no line. A lifetime of small slights suddenly made sense. Every time she told me to be the bigger person when Chloe wronged me. Every time she minimized my achievements while explaining away Chloe's failures. It wasn't poor parenting. It was the consistent, long-term enforcement of a twisted family hierarchy. The final piece of evidence came from a search of her laptop's hard drive. It was a draft, an email to Chloe from before the first loan was ever taken out. In it, my mother gave her precise instructions. She detailed how to use my impeccable but low-profile credit and my social security number to secure the business loans. And then came the sentence that sealed her fate, the one that proved motive and intent beyond any shadow of a doubt. She wrote, "Think of it as a victimless way to get you the start you deserve." Victimless. I wasn't a person. I wasn't her daughter. I was a resource. An abstraction on a balance sheet she was evening out. In her eyes, my success was a debt Chloe was entitled to collect. The investigation was over. The part of the operation where you gather intelligence in the dark was done. Now it was time to move into the light. It was time to process that intelligence, to organize it, to weaponize it. It was time to build the instrument of their accountability. For 1 week, I worked. I cleared my schedule. I didn't answer calls. I ate at my desk. My apartment became an evidence processing lab. I went to a supply store and bought a 4-inch heavy-duty binder. Black. I bought professional document tabs and a high-capacity 3-hole punch. The physical act of it was important. Each click of the punch through a stack of paper was a sound of finality. Each crisp new tab was a chapter in the story of their downfall. I printed every piece of evidence in triplicate. 1 copy for them, 1 for me, and 1 for the authorities, should it come to that. The muscle memory from my military career took over completely. It was just like building a mission briefing binder. You organize the data. You anticipate every question, every denial. You build a fortress of facts so tall and so thick that no lie can possibly scale it. You control the narrative not through emotion but through irrefutable, overwhelming proof. Everyone has a way of getting into that headspace, that zone of pure focus when a critical task is at hand. What's your go-to power-up activity? A specific playlist? A long run? A particular ritual? For me, it was this: the quiet, methodical assembly of truth. The first section was labeled Identity Theft. It contained the fraudulent loan applications. the credit reports showing the damage, the copies of the pre-signed blank forms from the storage unit, the second section, financial fraud. It held every single bank statement from the secret account, the wire transfer confirmations, the evidence of the vendor deposit scam. I created charts and graphs, clean and simple, showing the flow of money from my name to their pockets. The third section was the heart of it, the kill shot. It was labeled conspiracy. In it, I placed the email from my father's financial advisor, the one proving he was warned, and right behind it, the draft of the email from my mother to my sister, the one that called my financial ruin a victimless act. The final part of this section was the timeline, a minute-by-minute, day-by-day accounting of their crimes, cross-referenced with my deployment schedules, communication logs, and financial records. And as I was putting the last entry in place, I found something that made the cold professional anger I'd been nursing flare into something hot and deeply personal. The largest fraudulent loan, the one for $150,000, was taken out on April 17th. I stared at the date. My blood ran cold. I checked my own records. On April 16th, the day before, I had received the Joint Service Commendation Medal. I remembered calling them, so proud, so excited to share the news. I remember they sounded happy but distracted, distant. I had assumed they were just busy. They weren't busy. They were celebrating my achievement by immediately leveraging my decorated name to commit a felony. The pride I felt in that medal in my service was nothing more than a new asset to them, a new line of credit in their portfolio of fraud. I felt the weight of the binder in my hands. It was heavy with proof, with paper, with ink. But mostly, it was heavy with the sheer density of their betrayal. This wasn't a collection of facts anymore. I'm not writing a story. I'm writing a verdict. The day before Chloe and Liam were due back from their honeymoon, my weapon was ready. But I had one final piece of intelligence to gather. I needed to know the state of my primary witness. I needed to know where Liam stood. Confronting the three of them together was an option, but an uncontrolled one. Liam was the variable. He could be an asset, or he could be a liability. I had to know which. So I made a strategic decision. Do you think it was the right thing to do, telling the groom first? Or should I have confronted the whole family all at once? I'm interested in the pros and cons of that choice. In my assessment, a direct, 3-on-1 confrontation was too risky. I needed to isolate one of them first. I needed an ally. I called Liam. My tone was level, neutral. Liam, I said, we need to talk. It's about what you said at the wedding. He agreed immediately. We met at a sterile coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the airport. A neutral location. He looked tired. Tanned, but tired. I didn't bring the binder. That would have been a declaration of war. This was a reconnaissance mission. I gave him the sanitized, top-level briefing. I looked him in the eye and I laid out the facts I had chosen for him. Chloe's business, I began, had severe financial irregularities that put you in direct legal and personal jeopardy. To protect you from that, I had to intervene. I watched his face. No reaction. Just listening. I slid one piece of paper across the table. It was the printout of the wire transfer from the criminal shell company into the Seattle Well account. He stared at it. I saw his jaw tighten. The company was funded through identity theft, I continued, keeping my voice low. The loans that paid for the business for the wedding, they weren't in Chloe's name. I didn't say whose name they were in. I didn't have to. I let the silence hang in the air between us. I was betting everything on an instinct I'd had about him months earlier, during that frantic phone call. He hadn't bombarded me with questions then. He had listened, and he had trusted me enough to follow a set of bizarre instructions from someone he barely knew. I was betting that the man who had trusted me then was still sitting in front of me now. A need to know if I saved a good man or just a fool. He didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He didn't defend her. A look of quiet, dawning horror crept over his face. The kind of look a man gets when he realizes the entire foundation of his life is a lie. He looked down at the wire transfer, then up at me. His eyes were full of a terrible, dawning comprehension. The identity, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The identity they stole? It was yours, wasn't it? I just nodded. Once. He closed his eyes, and a long, shuddering breath escaped him. He was quiet for what felt like a lifetime. When he opened his eyes again, the devastation was still there, but it was overlaid with something else. Resolve. He looked directly at me, the way he had at the wedding. The look was the same. Clear, serious. What do you need me to do? He asked. And there it was, the key discovery. My variable had just become a constant. Liam wasn't just a victim anymore. He was now my witness. And the first member of my jury. The time for investigation was over. The time for confrontation was at hand. My ally was secured. My weapon was forged. All that was left was to choose the battlefield. I chose my apartment. My territory. I sent a single text message, a group text to my mother, my father, and my sister. The words were carefully chosen for their cold, hard authority. I have scheduled a family meeting at my apartment tomorrow at 2 p.m. It is not optional. There was no warmth, no room for negotiation. It was an order. And I knew after Liam's performance at the wedding, they were off balance enough to obey. Liam had already confirmed he would be there. The next day, I prepared the room. I didn't clean it to make it welcoming. I stripped it of personality. I removed photos, books, anything that felt like me. I turned my home into a sterile, impersonal interrogation room. I placed 4 chairs around my dining table, one on each side. An island of accountability. In the dead center of the table, I placed the binder. The black binder, 4 inches thick. Its cover read simply, Project Nightingale. Then, I sat down and I waited. And as I waited, I thought of all the times the roles had been reversed. All the family meetings I'd been summoned to over the years. Meetings to be lectured about my career choices. Meetings to mediate another one of Chloe's self-inflicted dramas. Meetings where my role was always to be the quiet, responsible one who absorbed the tension and fixed the problem. Today, the roles were corrected. Dundee had called the meeting. Anine set the agenda. And I controlled the room. Welcome to the accountability portion of your evening. There's a unique feeling you get, walking into a room where you know a serious confrontation is about to happen. Can you describe that feeling in a single word? Let me know. For me, sitting there, waiting, the word was stillness. The nerves were gone. My heart was beating in a slow, steady rhythm. I was a commander in my own operations center, waiting for the hostile actors to arrive for their final mandatory debriefing. They arrived separately, all within 5 minutes of the appointed time. Their entrances told me everything I needed to know. My mother came in first, forcing a breezy, casual smile, as if this was just a surprise pop-in for tea. My sister, Chloe, was next, sullen and radiating a nervous, defiant energy. My father was last. He just looked lost, confused, like a man who knew he was in trouble but couldn't remember the crime. Their demeanors, their individual states of guilt and denial, confirmed their roles in the conspiracy before a single word of accusation was spoken. They took their seats. The binder sat between us, a black hole absorbing all the light in the room. My mother, true to form, tried to seize control with gaslighting. "Well, this is a serious-looking setup, Rae," she said, her laugh sounding brittle and false. "What's all this about?" I didn't answer her question. I didn't look at her. I placed my hands on the binder and opened it. The sound of the heavy-duty ring snapping open was loud in the silence. "We are here," I began, my voice even and devoid of all emotion, "to discuss the systematic, multi-year conspiracy to commit identity theft and financial fraud against me." I saw my father flinch. Chloe stared at me, her jaw set. My mother's smile froze. I proceeded, section by section. My voice was the dry, factual voice of a prosecutor reading an indictment. There was no room for argument. There was only the relentless cascade of proof. I slid the first set of documents across the table to Chloe. Exhibit A, the fraudulent loan applications and the vendor invoices from your non-existent business. I turned to my mother. Exhibit B, the draft of your email detailing how to use my credit, and the bank statements showing your $2,000 monthly consulting fee. Then I turned to my father. And Exhibit C, the loan agreement for $100,000, listing me as personal guarantor with a forged signature. I watched their faces as they looked at the proof of their own crimes. My mother's composure was crumbling. Chloe's defiance was hardening into a glassy-eyed stare. My father just looked gray. His face was ashen. I was a detached observer, collecting data points of their reactions. And as I presented the evidence, I held on to one thought. I remembered every time they had ever called me too sensitive. Every time they told me I was making a big deal out of nothing. This binder, this mountain of evidence, was the physical manifestation of me being right. This is the central question in any confrontation, isn't it? What do you think is more powerful, overwhelming emotion or overwhelming evidence? I'd love to know what you think and why. I had made my choice. I had chosen evidence. The turning point came when I slid the final piece of evidence from the conspiracy section across the table to my father. It was the email from his financial advisor, the one that explicitly warned him against the loan structure, the one he had ignored. He read it, and I heard him make a small sound, an audible gasp, a little puff of air as the last of his plausible deniability was executed right there on our dining room table. He stopped looking at the papers. He looked up, but not at me. He stared at my mother, and then at Chloe, with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. The united front of my family, the silent, unspoken pact that had governed our entire lives, was broken. In that moment, he knew that they hadn't just lied to me. They had lied to him, too. That's when Chloe finally broke. "You're twisting everything," she spat, her voice rising. "You always had it so easy. Everything was always so perfect for you. I just needed a little help." My mother jumped in, her voice a protective wail. "We were helping you, Chloe. It was for your future. Rae has her career, she didn't need it." They were trying to make it emotional, to drag it back onto their territory of tears and accusations and guilt. I remained silent. I let them talk. I let their frantic, panicked words fill the space. And then, a new voice cut through the noise. Liam. He had been a silent observer until now. He spoke, and his voice was low, controlled, and full of a cold, quiet danger. "You used her name," he said, looking directly at Chloe. "And you almost got me sent to prison, or worse." He paused. "Stop talking." And they did. The room fell into absolute silence. The fight drained out of them, replaced by the crushing weight of total exposure. I felt no triumph, no joy, just the quiet, grim satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The truth doesn't need me to yell. It just needs to be seen. I turned to the final tab in the binder. I pulled out 4 copies of a single document and placed them on the table. It was a full legal confession and an agreement for total financial restitution drafted by my lawyer. I took 3 black pens from my pocket and placed them neatly on the table beside the documents. I watched their faces, and a memory surfaced. A small one. Me, in 3rd grade. My mother, forging my signature on a permission slip I had forgotten to get signed. It seemed so insignificant at the time. A little white lie to save me from getting in trouble. Now I see it for what it was. The first step on a very long road that led directly to this table. This is a question I don't have an answer for. What would it take for you to forgive a betrayal of this magnitude? Is forgiveness even on the table? My father was the first to move. He picked up a pen. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the paper, his hand trembling slightly. He whispered a single phrase, so quiet I could barely hear it. "I'm sorry." And then he signed his name. His signature was the signal. It was the surrender. My mother broke into quiet, shuddering sobs. Chloe stared at her father, then at the paper, her face a mask of furious disbelief. She had been abandoned. Cornered. She snatched a pen from the table and signed her name with a sharp, angry, jerky motion. Her surrender wasn't born of remorse. It was born of defeat. The 3 signed confessions sat on the table. The ink was still wet. My mother was crying silently. My father stared at his hands. Chloe was radiating pure, uncut hatred. Their emotional states were no longer my concern. They were simply data points in a concluded operation. I stood up and opened my apartment door. A colleague of my lawyer, a notary public, was waiting in the hall as arranged. Liam stood beside him. They came in. Liam acted as the primary witness. The notary, a man my family had never seen before, acted as the second. He checked their IDs. He asked them if they were signing of their own free will. The irony was thick enough to choke on. One by one, they mumbled that they were. The notary stamped each signature with a heavy final thud. The documents were now legally binding. The notary and my witness left. I closed the door and turned back to the three people who were now, in the eyes of the law, my debtors. The confessions were the easy part, I said, my voice as calm as it had been all day. Now, we discuss the terms of your surrender. I didn't sit down. I stood at the head of the table. The power dynamic had been permanently inverted. They were no longer the board of directors of my life. I was their parole officer. A memory from a training exercise surfaced, a hostage negotiation scenario. The instructor had told us, you don't just want the other party to surrender, you want them to comply with the terms of that surrender. The key is to leave them with a path forward, but a path entirely of your own design. Term 1, I stated. The entity known as Clowell will be legally dissolved, effective immediately. All remaining assets will be liquidated by my lawyer to begin repayment of the fraudulent loans. Chloe started to speak, but my father put a hand on her arm. Term 2. The liquidation will not cover the full debt. Therefore you, I said, looking at my parents, will be selling your second home, the one in the mountains. The proceeds will be used to clear the remaining balance and to repair the damage to my credit rating. My mother let out a small sob. That house was her pride and joy. Term 3. The three of you will attend family therapy, not with me, and not for reconciliation. You will go for the sole purpose of explaining, in front of a licensed professional, exactly what you did and why you did it. Liam and I will attend the first session only as observers to ensure the therapist has the accurate facts of the case. And term 4, I said, walking over to the small bowl by my door. I picked up the 2 keys sitting inside it. You will no longer have access to my home. You will no longer have access to my personal information, my finances, or my life. All contact, from this moment forward, will be initiated by me. If I need to speak to you, I will call. You will not call me. I looked at them, at their broken, defeated faces, and the key discovery of the entire ordeal finally landed. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel a sense of triumph. I felt nothing. A profound and liberating indifference. Their emotional states, their tears, their silent rage. It was all just noise from another room. I had successfully and permanently firewalled my heart from their chaos. This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality. I had given them consequences, but not total ruin. I left them with a path forward, but it was a path paved with the stones of their own making. This is the choice I made. She gave them consequences, but not legal ruin. Was this the right move? Should she have sent them to jail? I want you to tell me what you would have done. Weeks later, the new reality was taking shape. The liquidation of their lives was underway. A series of emails and updates from my lawyer that I reviewed with the emotional detachment of a quarterly report. My apartment, once a command center, was starting to feel like a home again. It was quiet. It was mine. I was on a video call with Liam. He was in a new apartment of his own. The divorce from Chloe was in motion. It was uncontested. He told me she had moved back in with my parents. A new, strange kind of friendship was forming between us, one built on a foundation of brutal honesty. He thanked me again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just for saving him. It was for showing him the truth, as ugly as it was. After the call, I walked over to my laptop. I opened a travel website. I booked a one-way ticket to a place I'd always wanted to see. A solo trip. I paid for it with a new credit card, one that had only my name on it. The feeling was indescribable, and as I sat there, a memory surfaced. A small, insignificant one. I was 6 years old, holding a drawing I had worked on all afternoon. A picture of a soaring bird. I ran to show it to my mother. She was in the living room, cooing over a tower of blocks Chloe had just knocked over. She waved me away, distracted. "That's nice, dear," she'd said, without even looking. I remember quietly folding the drawing and putting it in my pocket. I never showed it to anyone again. For my entire life, I had been that little girl, quietly putting my achievements away because they weren't valued by the only people whose validation I craved. Standing in my quiet apartment, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's. I had finally learned to validate my own work. The whole journey started because they looked at my life and my career and they called me unimpressive. They called me useless. I want to end by asking you this. What's one word you would use to describe me now? Put it in the comments below. Let's give that little girl the validation her family never could. I opened a new blank document on my computer. I gave it a title, Project Rae. I started to type, planning my future on my own terms. And I finally understood. My greatest skill, my methodical forensic mind, was never truly meant for a battlefield overseas. Its primary purpose, its highest and best use, was for this. For the methodical, forensic reclamation of my own life. The title Liam had given me at the wedding, Commander Rae, it wasn't just about my past. It was a prophecy. It was the title of the person I had to become to save myself. My name is Rae, and, for the first time, it feels like it's mine.